Welcome to Keen on Retirement, a show dedicated to helping you thrive before and during your retirement years. If you are looking to grow and protect your wealth and want to make the second half of your life the best half, then listen in as Wealth Advisor Bill Keen sorts through the key issues that you need to know in a lively and candid way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Keen on Retirement. We are in the new year now, 2025, and here in the Kansas City area where you two guys are, it started off with a bit of a snowstorm. So I think you guys are still a little bit recovering from some snow and some ice. So, and I think today you're actually, Matt, I think you're in the office, but Bill, I think you're dialing in from home here today.
Yeah, well, I was at the home office here. It looks good. I hope my backdrop and everything looks good. Sound quality. I've got a great professional studio set up here, so allows for us to pivot from time to time. And we got jackpot totals here in the Northland of Kansas City, didn't we? Early last week, Matt.
Yeah, we were supposed to have we do our year-end, I guess, holiday party after the first of the year. For the company,
yeah.
And it's just, we're so busy and everyone's busy at year end that we like to wait till afterwards. And we had to reschedule it because of the snowstorm that came in.
Yes, we did. That was a great move. We did it a few days in advance, just wondering if the timing of when it might hit. And instead of having all of our team driving around, we were doing it on a Saturday here at Carissa and I's house. Early January, like Matt said, and made the call a couple days early and wasn't trying to be alarmist, but it was definitely the right call. Definitely the right call. Worst storm we've seen in quite a few years. I've heard several quotes from different weathermen and women over this last week or week and a half. So, yeah.
But it was the jackpot. I thought you were talking about that $1 billion plus Powerball jackpot.
Well, we haven't hit that yet, or any of our clients yet. But that's a term, Steve, that I've heard over the last monitoring the weather men and women. They talk about the jackpot totals, which means the kind of high totals for a storm. I'm deducing that now, and actually we didn't quite get that. I think though in Matt and I's neighborhood we did get around 12 inches or so, just north of us in an area called St. Joe. Up that direction, I think I saw 16 or 17. So, a good little bit. I don't know if that's a lot for guys from Wisconsin, Steve. Like that might be just a normal winter for you all, but that's been a while.
Well, a foot of snow anywhere, I think, is a pretty good total, unless you're up in the mountains, which would be a common occurrence. But a foot of snow, that's serious, whether you're in Wisconsin, Nebraska, North Dakota, wherever you may be.
That's right. And, last week, the temperature stayed very low, so it was just all kind of hung around. But that's the seasons for you, and so
it absolutely is. All right,
so
we absolutely will. And speaking of rolling, let's roll right into today's main topic, which is we're going to talk about a couple of things. One is Social Security. So there's some changes that are taking place here based on some new legislation. So we'll walk through that. We also have some retirement account updates, and then we also have some information about some changes to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act and whether that will be renewed or whether that'll expire or what we need to be thinking about that with the new administration. So lots of good things to jump into. So Matt, why don't you kick us off here? Tell us about the Social Security Fairness Act.
Yeah, this was something that I saw rumblings of it at the end of 2024, signed in, and then finally signed into law January 5th, 2025. And essentially what this is there's the Social Security Administration, they've estimated that there's about 2 million beneficiaries who've had their retirement income. So the income from Social Security that they would be eligible for reduced due to two programs, one being the windfall elimination provision and the government pension offset. And you would know if this applies to you because, basically you would have gotten notification that, hey, you are eligible for this, but however, because of these two programs, depending on which one impacted you, you're getting less than what you're eligible for. And this has been around, it's been around for a long time. But essentially, here's kind of what those two things are. It applies primarily where we see it the most is to teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So teachers, especially in Missouri, they're eligible for a pension, and they contribute to that pension through their payroll. Like, it's part of a mandatory payroll deduction, and because of that, the Missouri pension does not require them to pay into Social Security, so they're exempt from the Social Security tax. So they don't pay into Social Security; they just pay into the pension. And what these provisions are in place for, so people aren't like double dipping, like they're not getting something that they shouldn't have been eligible for. But what happens is, like, let's say, for example, you worked somewhere for 20 years and you paid Social Security, you paid in, FICA tax, just like everyone else does. And then you became a teacher for the second 20 years of your career. Well, that second 20 years that you became a teacher, especially in Missouri, would eliminate your eligibility to receive any Social Security, which you paid into for the first 20 years of your career. So now, by passing this, they're going to get what they're eligible for. Also applies to spousal benefits and surviving spouses, especially surviving spouses. Like, same example, Missouri teacher, their spouse passed away. Because of these programs, they would be ineligible for survivor benefits, or maybe it'd be very small. And, someone who didn't pay into the Social Security Administration at all, a spouse, if they never paid in, they worked at home, they would be eligible for survivor benefits. So it's like, because they were a teacher, they're kind of getting, unfairly treated. So I think this was a good thing that they passed.
Man, this affected as well firefighters, police officers, other kind of public servants too, across the board.
I believe so, yeah. Especially the ones that are exempt. As long as you've paid into it, like, it's not,
yes,
you were exempt and then you just never paid, now you're getting something. It's just, no, it's getting what you're eligible for.
For sure. And we've talked in the past, I think we've said 40 quarters, right, would be enough to, 40 quarters, or another way of saying 10 years.
That's right.
Of paying into Social Security through FICA taxes qualifies someone for some benefit, not maximum benefit, of course, but for some benefit.
That's right.
So is there anything that I need to do here to make sure that I get this stuff that I'm now eligible for?
If you've already claimed Social Security and you have all that set up, there's nothing new to do. And then for those who haven't claimed, whenever you now go through the process of claiming, of course, they'll tell you what you're eligible for. I went on the Social Security Administration's website too, and they even said they have no details on how this is being administered. So there's just no action at this point, is what Social Security is telling everyone.
I saw it where it said, make sure your direct deposit is
Yes.
set up correctly, your bank account is set up correctly. And Steve, the way you asked Matt that, you queried Matt, you asked, is there anything you should do? Are you going to be trying to file for some of these things? Or were you a teacher in a prior life we didn't know about? Or was that just
No.
Oh, okay. That
Not
was
me.
You were asking for our listeners that you qualify.
I did look in the past few days. I did look up my Social Security statement, and I think we probably talked about this in past episodes. But it's fairly easy just to go online to the Social Security website and log in or create an account if you haven't done that yet. But it shows you a nice little report, and it'll show you every year what your earnings were, and it will also show what your projected Social Security payment is depending on when you actually take it. And it's as we all know, it's a pretty significant difference between if you start taking Social Security when you're 62 versus taking it when you're 66 or 67 or even 70. It makes a big difference. And so that's another important reason to talk to a financial professional who can walk you through the analysis there, ask you a bunch of questions, to help you make an informed decision about when is the best time to take that. It may not necessarily be the financially optimal time because, again, there's different circumstances, health issues, that sort of thing that can determine that. But another big critical decision to make when you're at retirement age.
Yes, right. And Steve, I was going to ask you, since you were on there, did you go ahead and look and maybe just a cursory view of what it shows as your income over so many years of your career that you've paid in? Did you and it does max out. So if you go over the limit that they withhold on, your early years, and I'm assuming you did, not to ask you to share that with us, but at some point you probably started going over that limit. But when you were younger, it shows you those early years, probably even way back. I remember looking at mine not long ago, and it's like, oh, I made $3,000 that year, or whatever, working through high school and college or whatever. But did you verify yours and it looked right?
Yeah, I took a pretty close look, and it looked accurate for sure. And it was interesting. There was one year, 2013, when I was in between work, where it showed a big fat goose egg, zero. I literally had zero income that year when I was in between jobs. And so, that was kind of hairy, particularly for someone who was like 50 years old, 51 years old at the time, prime earning years to have zero income.
Right.
But it's, all's well that ends well, and it is ending well. So
let's see, Matt, wait a second. Let me sketch back. Was that when we finally got Steve to agree to be our podcast co-host? No, that was a few years later. Okay. Now we see why
a couple years later. Yeah. That's when things started to pick up, Bill.
Yes.
Well, you'll have to share with our listeners. I think you were, anyway, you don't have to share with our listeners, but I think that was kind of a planned situation where you moved from one career to something different, maybe operating a little bit of a time frame there while you were able to then go back into work at some point. But
and I think there is an important lesson in there. And so I was in between jobs. I was was working with a business partner for over a decade and had a great run, but decided it was time I wanted to do something different. And reflecting back on it, I didn't really have a plan on what I was going to do after I left. I just knew that I wanted to do something different, and I most likely wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but I didn't really have a plan. And I think that was part of the problem, in that year I sort of floundered for quite a while. I did have a non-compete, so there were certain things that I couldn't do.
That's what I was speaking of. Yeah.
But even despite that, there were definitely things I could have done and should have been putting in place during that time, but didn't. And so it was a good lesson on the importance of planning. And of course, you guys are in the planning business here at Keen Wealth Advisors, and just the importance of that. And so it is critical to talk to other people, other professionals who have this experience. They know what kind of questions to ask, and they can help you plan. And so if you're thinking about retirement, if it's even, a few years down the road, it's not too early to start talking about it, and making sure that you're doing all the things you need to be doing ahead of time to make that transition to retirement much smoother. So, so planning pays.
That's right. Or a career change like you made, or anything substantive. And, I think it's interesting. Again, this isn't about, I didn't tell you we're going to be interviewing you about your history on this show, Steve, but to share with our listeners, you were in that business you were in, you decided to move on from. You were in the business of training financial advisors across the country, right?
Right.
I mean, you've been a CFP professional and have been in our industry for many years, decades, and did a great job there in the training of best practices from all angles for financial advisors, thousands of financial advisors, if I would recall that correctly. So it was cool. Yeah. And so we're grateful you're on this side of it now, working with us for 10 years almost now.
Yeah. And it's also important to live your own teaching, right? You can't just, talk the talk. You got to walk the talk too. And I did, but not to the extent that I could have during that time. And again, reflecting back, it's always easy to look back and say, oh, I should have done this. I should have done that. But in the moment, you're always thinking like, okay, I think I'm making the best decision right now based on the information that I have at the moment, which I think for the most part I did. But again, reflecting back, I think, gosh, if I'd just planned a little bit more and thought through things, I probably could have hit the ground running a little faster than I did.
Yeah. Well, it's good to make that assessment and learn. So that's wonderful. And I know you had your financial house in order and all that, but it was still like it could always be better when you look back, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So awesome.
Great. Okay. So we have that Social Security Fairness Act. We had some things come out of that. And then we also have some retirement account updates. So what's going on in that area?
Yeah. I mean, for 2025, there isn't a significant change to, to the tax system or to, to what individuals can and can't do. But there are updates. And I think one of the big ones that is different. This is a unique thing that is now becoming. It was part of the Secure Act that was passed a few years ago, 2.0, where they're changing these catch-up contributions. So what those are related to your retirement plan where you work. So if you're a W-2 employee or if you're self-employed, and you set up a retirement plan such as a 401k, if you're over age 50, you can make what's called a catch-up contribution. And that amount for 2025 is $7,500. But they carved out in a really weird way. I don't know why they decided to do it this way. But, the government does things to balance the budget, so it does weird stuff sometimes. From ages 60 to 63, there's what they are deeming a super catch-up contribution of $11,250. So it's not in addition to the $7,500. It's just at age 60. So if you're 60 years old now in 2025, you can put in $11,250 more than the regular contribution. Then once you hit age 64, it goes back down to $7,500, and that's 64 plus. So
makes complete sense, Matt.
Yeah.
What do they figure? They're like, hey, this guy or lady,
you don't want to save too much.
60 to 63, they still kind of have a shot, maybe at saving some money.
An extra $4,000 going to. That's right.
But the people over 64, I guess they're just, there's too late. Might as well just limit them. I don't know exactly what that thinking was. If we ever figure it out, we'll report back.
So that's a unique thing this year. So that is, and again, for most plans, I've not come across a plan that automatically signs you up for the catch-up. So you have to, if you're eligible and you want to participate, you should go online now and check and make sure that you've checked the box or whatever the process is within your retirement plan to say, yes, I want to contribute the catch-up contribution. And then they will extend your payroll withdrawals to that, extra contribution limit. So those are related to the retirement plan. And then you've got regular IRA contributions or Roth IRA contributions. So those are outside of your retirement plan. You can make contributions, and the limit stays at $7,000 for everyone except those age 50. Now, this is just 50 and older can do an extra $1,000. So those are related to the retirement accounts. Nothing, nothing huge, but a unique kind of nuanced to those in 2025.
And they literally called it the super catch-up contribution. Did they give it that actual name, or are you calling it that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if they're defining it within the IRS, but
I think in recent years the government has become a little bit of a branding organization where they're trying to come up with catchy names for some of these different things to give it a little more cachet. I suppose.
The Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, that's catchy. I'm all for that, right?
Sure. Right.
Anything to reduce inflation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's right.
We were just talking about Social Security a minute ago, and I had made a couple notes here. I was going to ask you about this, and did I see that the cost of living adjustment for 25 is going to be 2.5%?
That's right. Yeah, and that was announced in late October, early November. Of course, those automatically apply to everyone's benefits.
Yep. So when you mentioned inflation reduction, it made me think of because prior, what was it? I don't recall exactly what it was, but there was a year or two ago where Social Security went up like 7% or something, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't everybody?
Yeah,
get
there
that?
were a couple of years where it was significant, but of course inflation was high too.
Exactly. And then I saw the maximum monthly benefit now is $4,018. I guess that would be for somebody turning age 70 this year.
That I think is full retirement age maximum.
Full retirement age. So at 70, that would be higher. We have seen those higher. Full retirement age now is 66 and 10 months.
That's right.
And the Social Security tax limit in 2025 is they'll be taking FICA taxes out for Social Security up to $176,100, which is up $7,500 from the prior year. So that's something we talked about before we went live about how the system could get fixed or at least extended, and that's one of the ways, isn't it? But look at that. They just increased that $7,500 in 1 year. So
was that a bipartisan move? Do you have any idea? Was that
to increase
approved
it?
to increase it? Was that approved bipartisan, or was that?
That's not I'm not quite sure when they implemented this, but it's been on an escalator for years, so it's not.
So it's sort of automatic.
Yep.
Okay. So no one has to go on the record as to voting for or against that.
They passed something. I think it had to have been probably within the last 20 years, because I remember, just early on when I first got into the business, it was $100,000, $110,000. I mean, it was a low number, and they've been catching it up, and that's kind of what some of these catch-up contributions are and everything. They're supposed to at least kind of account for the fact that, yes, inflation has gone up, and it generally goes up every year. But, even more so in the last few years, that we've got to account for that and allow people to, to save more as well. But of course, they do it on both sides, where taxes go up by, an inflation amount. Like the Social Security tax limit, that went up more than, what the CPI was in 2024. And some things do that, and others are kind of tied to different inflation wages. Like Medicare went up to $185, but Social Security went up, 2.5%. So it's a smaller dollar amount, but it's kind of a larger inflating figure on some of these.
I just pulled up. Well, just kind of ran a quick calculation, and so we saw cost of living for Social Security. This is money coming out or over into the consumer, 2.5% adjustment. The actual tax limit, Social Security tax limit, $7,500 on the prior limit is 4.4%.
Yeah.
So money coming into the system is escalating a little higher than money.
That's right. Well,
out.
And some things haven't had inflation adjustments for decades.
Yes.
Like, for example, like we always, when we talk through our tax planning, for those that have investments outside of retirement accounts. So these are, typically what we would call after-tax accounts or brokerage accounts. And you pay tax as you go. Dividends and interest are taxed each year. And then any gains that you realize are taxed as well. And, we have a process where we look at any realized gains and we try to offset them, realize some losses. So take investments that are, down in value, offset the gains, reinvest it in something similar. So they're not, you're not out, so to speak. You're just kind of shifting things around to take advantage of the tax code. Well, if you have more losses than gains, you can carry forward those losses, which is, great. If you don't have any kind of gains to offset, well, the IRS allows you to take $3,000 of losses against your ordinary income. So if you had $100,000 in losses, over time, and you never had a gain again, over time, you'll end up using it up. But if you had a lot of losses, you probably won't. But that has been in law since 1978, and it's still $3,000 today.
And we've had no inflation since 78, so it's not a problem, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, because that would reduce government revenue, IRS. So of course they don't want to change that. And
so if it was inflation adjusted, what would that $3,000 capital loss limitation translate to today?
it'd be almost 15,000.
Okay.
Significant.
Yeah. Yeah. And like the other one, like another big one is the provisional income calculation. So that is for the calculation that determines how much of your Social Security is taxed as income. And it's a convoluted formula, but it's a low threshold. So if you're single filer, and your provisional income calculation is more than 25,000, then 50% of your Social Security counts as income, and it flows through the tax bracket. And that starts at 32,000 for a married couple. That was passed in law in 1984, and those numbers have not changed. So the taxation of Social Security when you're receiving it has been the exact same it's been since 1984, 40 years. And I looked up if that would be in today's dollars, that'd be 77,000 for the single filer and 99,000 for the married filer.
Those are the easiest tax increases for the government to put forth on the taxpayer because they are imperceptive over time. It doesn't require anything to be
and they're
passed.
not talking about it.
Right. No one realizes that that's been a slow tax increase by them not adjusting these things for inflation.
Yeah, prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I mean, AMT, alternative minimum tax, was a big thing that was hitting a lot of people, and they fixed that in 2017 when they passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. But yeah, sometimes these things don't get any attention. All of a sudden they do, and then maybe it kind of works its way into a bill. And that could be one of the things that we could see with the new administration talking about no tax on Social Security, and that can be part of that provisional income calculation. Maybe they'd change it.
Well, and then you've got the state and local tax deduction, which has been capped at $10,000 per year. And there's, I think, strong bipartisan support to either remove the cap completely or maybe increase it substantially. So both blue states and red states, I think, are interested in that.
Yeah. Yeah, that was part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act as well, putting a cap on it. Prior to that, there was no cap. And that is set to expire at the end of this year. So that is something that we are going to keep a close eye on and be communicating regularly about what's happening with that. I mean, highly likely that it gets extended considering the makeup of Congress. However, what changes? I don't think they're going to keep it exactly the same way. And that could just be, like you mentioned, Steve, maybe it's the SALT, state and local tax deduction cap, gets increased or removed completely.
Right. Which, if they do that, then that reduces government income, which increases the deficit. And of course, we've got a lot of folks interested in substantially cutting the deficit. And we were talking before we went live here about DOGE. I don't know if we said much about that in the past podcasts, the new Department of Government Efficiency. So I'm sure that's something we're going to be hearing a lot more about here this year, and something that we'll definitely want to be paying close attention to and see what that does to government and services and just what happens there. So that'll be big news, I'm sure, here in 2025.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of interested parties, and it's I think the Department of Government Efficiency is going to realize it's not like running your own business.
No, not at all. I mean, every dollar less that the government spends is a dollar less of income to somebody. So there's an interested party in maintaining that government spending because it's income to somebody. And so I think that, of course, and you don't get reelected usually by cutting government spending. You get reelected by spending more government dollars and, giving people money. It's like, yeah, give me money. I'll vote for you.
Yeah. And I mean, to that point, Steve, I mean, we've talked about this on prior episodes. It's that there's been very few years going back to, I think, 1950 to where the government actually had a balanced budget or a surplus, I mean, they're almost it doesn't matter who's in charge, Republican or Democrat, they're always running deficits. They're spending more than they bring in.
Yeah. So, 2025 will definitely be a year to remember, I'm sure.
Yeah. A lot of things going on. Kind of along those lines, a few other notable changes. HSA contributions increased, $4,300 for an individual, $8,550 for family, and then if you're 55 and older, you're eligible for another $1,000 catch-up contribution. Those are great tools. They call them triple tax exempt because you get the tax deduction when it goes in, and then there's no tax when it's used for qualified healthcare expenses. So Roth, you pay the tax and then you don't have to pay the tax again. Well, HSA, you get a deduction and then don't have to pay the tax. So anyone that's using those, we think they're great tools. It just has to make sense for you from a healthcare standpoint.
And then you're going to use that money for healthcare at some point.
The odds are, yes. It's not like you can transfer to a beneficiary, but it's not a really good asset to transfer. You want to use it.
Okay. It's not like a 529 where you can get them overfunded like we've seen folks.
Yeah, there's no benefit because it actually ends up being taxable to the beneficiaries. So it's you want to use it. That's right.
Yep. But with only being able to put these amounts, certainly with the costs of healthcare, at some point in your life, you're likely going to draw this money down for health purposes. Because I was going to ask you, if you don't use it for healthcare, I'm sure there's taxes.
You can convert it to an IRA, so then they pay tax like an IRA.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Steve, I cut you off. Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, do you run across many folks who take their HSA money and invest it? Because I know I've got that option. I've got some of mine invested. So I'm using after-tax dollars to pay some health stuff and just letting the HSA dollars grow and be invested. Do you see much of that? Or
we do. For the ones that do decide that because you have to have a high deductible healthcare plan. So that's the first, which just a lot of people don't choose that depending on the who their employer has for health insurance. It'd be nice if they allowed anyone who wanted to save access to an HSA, but it's just tied to a high deductible plan. And then what's most common for the HSA accounts is that you have to keep 1 year of your deductible in money market or cash, and then over and above that, they allow you to invest it. And we have a lot of clients that do have those, that do have balances that are invested.
Good.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Anything else that you want to wrap up with today?
Well, I think this is important. I think, we're starting off the year. Always good to look at some of these numbers, familiarize ourselves with the ability to save and invest and how much we keep in our pockets. So being aware of what taxes look like and how this all plays out, working toward that goal that I say we all share. And that's, I believe we all share that goal of someday we want to have work become optional. I always say, instead of writing the book Keen on Retirement, I could have changed the title to Keen on Work Becoming Optional, but it was just a little too long. So I used
a long web address.
A long web address. I used the old term retirement, Steve, that I remember being at your house with Linda and Carissa 7 or 8 or 9 years ago, saying there's got to be a better word for retirement, because retirement just feels like it means we're going dormant, or we're not, it's the end, and all those things that we talk about retirement. But we know that's not the case. We know it's really truly the second half or the next phase of life, especially if we do it right and we get aware of these things that we talked about today, and that everyone has a financial plan in place. So we talked a lot today about these various things, but the question is, how does it all come together? And some things apply to each person, other things do not. Certain years they apply, other years they do not. They might apply to a spouse, they might apply to a child or a parent. How does this all come together? Well, there's one way to figure it out, and that's to make sure that each person has a comprehensive financial plan where the checklist is run through each and every year to make sure these things that do apply are accounted for and they're acted on, or they're not acted on intentionally, not because something was missed or it slipped through the cracks. So I think that's an important lesson today. There's one final thing. We were talking about money going out the door earlier. Some money coming into the government, some money going out. Now let's talk about personally. I know that this is an important part. A lot of our listeners, they gift money to the next generation, and so that new gift tax exclusion that's coming up in 2025, the year here we're in, is $19,000 this year. So I don't know if my kids track that, Steve and Matt, if they're paying attention to it. They're tracking the gift tax exclusion each year, knowing that might, if they behave, they might get the higher amount.
Well, hopefully they're listening to the podcast. So
hopefully,
they will know.
Yeah, I know. Because, last year it was 18. This year it's 19. So every person in the U.S. can give anybody else $19,000 a year without
no
any
matter who it is.
Paper trail.
No strings attached.
Doesn't have to be your family. It could be anybody. No paper trails, no questions asked. So that's that new number there. But I think it's a great way to start the new year with an episode that kind of sets the stage for these things, and we'll certainly keep track of anything else that comes down the line as it comes.
Great. Well, I think you mentioned retirement, coming up with a new word. I think maybe we should change the podcast name. Instead of Keen on Retirement, maybe we should call it the KOLO podcast, KOLO, which is the Keen on Life Optionality podcast.
Ooh. Okay. Well, we will put that on our list of options to consider.
That's right.
There you go. Optionality. I think that's a good word. We all like to have options.
That's very true. That's very true. We have a little discipline up front, and it gives us choices and options down the road. That's correct.
Excellent. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up today. So appreciate you all listening here or watching this perhaps on YouTube. And if you haven't been to the Keen Wealth Advisors YouTube channel, make sure that you check that out, and you can click the little subscribe button there, and that'll make sure that each time you go onto YouTube, it's going to feed you the new episodes and you'll get access to those. So we'd appreciate that. Of course, subscribe to the podcast here. We'd also love for you to share the podcast and the YouTube channel with all your friends and colleagues that you think want to learn a little bit more, get a little more educated on the financial side, which is what we're trying to do here. And of course, you can always visit keenwealthadvisors.com to learn more about the firm and reach out to the firm if you do want to work with an advisor or learn more about how that happens. So, all right. Again, Bill, Matt, thank you. And thanks for a great 2024. And we look forward to having a great 2025 as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
The Steve Sandusky Advisor Network and Belay Advisor are not affiliated with Keen Wealth Advisors. Opinions expressed by Steve are his own and not necessarily the opinions of Keen Wealth Advisors. Keen Wealth Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Keen Wealth Advisors and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. The contents of this podcast are intended for the residents of the United States of America. No advice may be rendered by Keen Wealth Advisors unless a client service agreement is in place. This program is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as advice on or a recommendation of any particular investment, strategy, or as tax or legal advice for your specific situation. Keen Wealth Advisors is not a tax or legal advisor. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your licensed professional prior to investing. Information in this program was compiled from sources believed to be reliable. Due to the constant state of data changing, we do not guarantee the timeliness or the accuracy of the information provided. Our views or opinions at the time you are listening to the podcast may be different than they were when the podcast was recorded. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. Any prices that are referenced or market forecasts are as of the date stated and are not necessarily our opinions moving forward. As always, please remember, investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. This podcast is not allowed to be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced without permission from Keen Wealth Advisors.